Mr. President, I rise to talk about the conflict in Syria, and in particular, what's happening over the next couple of days and weeks. We know that in the last 4 years, starting in 2011, this conflict has resulted in the deaths of 250,000 Syrians. More than 4 million Syrians have fled and registered as refugees in neighboring countries. We're told that 7.6 million Syrians are displaced from their homes within Syria itself. So when you combine those who have fled the country because of the violence and combine that with the number of folks displaced in the country, you got about half of the population of Syria. If we had the equivalent number here in the United States of over 300 million people, that would be something on the order of 150 million Americans displaced from their homes. We can't even imagine the scale of that suffering. At the center of this horror, this horrific war and humanitarian catastrophe, sits Bashar al-Assad, the dictator who, in the estimation of many, many experts and world leaders, and this is my opinion as well, has lost all legitimacy as the leader of Syria. A conflict that began with peaceful protests by Syrian young people for change quickly gave way to fighting in the streets of Homs, Dara, and Aleppo. Assad's security forces have attempted to quash dissent with brutal beatings, imprisonment, starvation, use of chemical weapons, and wholesale destruction from indiscriminate barrel bombs, which, by the way, is a violation of international law. These actions proved to be a recruiting windfall for extremists and terrorist groups like ISIS, which now operate along many major transportation routes and cities in parts of Syria. The Institute for the Study of War just this week assessed that ISIS is now challenging the Assad regime for control of the supply line to Aleppo, expanding their reach westward. And as I've said before, and some others have said, it's what I will continue to maintain: the conflict in Syria and the international effort to degrade and ultimately defeat ISIS are inextricably linked. We cannot expect to bring about a lasting defeat of ISIS without bringing about a political transition in Syria. The atrocities perpetrated by these two evils, one, the Assad regime, and also ISIS. These atrocities are too numerous to catalog today. Neither entity offers a stable, secure, and prosperous future for Syria. Several times, the United States has participated in international negotiations with an eye towards ending this horror and paving the road toward a third choice for Syrians. And that's what this would be: a real political transition featuring inclusiveness, rule of law, and the primacy of citizenship over sect, ethnicity, and other divisive categories. These conversations have yet to bear fruit, mostly because the regime in Iran and the Russians continue to offer a lifeline to the murderous Assad. But we must keep trying. We must keep trying. Just one look at the images of the destruction in Aleppo, or the faces of Syrians fleeing to Europe for a better life, reminds us of the human costs of inaction. It's because of this that the Iranian and Russian escalation in recent weeks is so outrageous. These countries look at Syria as a ground line of communication to Hezbollah, or a friendly host for a warm water naval outpost. They turn a blind eye to the suffering of ordinary men, women, and children in an effort to exert their international influence. Russia's warplanes have struck in areas where the Syrian opposition, not ISIS, operates. Their strikes appear indiscriminate and have killed many civilians. Now, in the case of Iran, the recent designation, or I should say the recent visit of a designated terrorist and IRGC commander, Qasem Soleimani, his movement to Syria indicates that Iran and its proxies like Hezbollah are still central elements of this fight. Mr. President, I'm on the floor today as leaders from major countries meet in Vienna. Yesterday, in a speech at the Carnegie Endowment, Secretary Kerry described his diplomatic task as, quote, charting a course out of hell, unquote. That's how he described the way out to a resolution, a political resolution in Syria. Although news reports indicate that these talks will not deal directly with the question of Bashar al-Assad, our policy must remain firm. Assad has no place in Syria's future. No bombing campaigns, no promise of sham elections should change that. And I want to commend the work that Secretary Kerry is doing. I want to commend him for the speech he gave yesterday. A month ago, I wrote to him calling for greater U.S. leadership on at least 3 tracks: political, multilateral, and humanitarian. In the response to my letter, the State Department emphasized, and I'm quoting, "The only way to sustainably end the suffering of the Syrian people is through a genuine political solution consistent with the Geneva Principles," unquote. I appreciate and agree with this commitment. However, I'm concerned that the governments of Syria, Iran, and Russia remain in clear violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions, including flouting arms control restrictions and travel sanctions. These regimes do not appear to be ready for dialogue consistent with Geneva Principles. Secretary Kerry said during his Carnegie speech yesterday that the U.S. and Russia have many points of common ground on Syria. The areas of divergence, however, are stark. We know that there is no military solution to this conflict. Only a political settlement can heal the deep wounds across Syria. And we must continually assert that no political solution can include a role for Bashar al-Assad. For a ruler who indiscriminately barrel bombs children over and over again, presides over the deaths of over 250,000 civilians, there must be no soft political landing. We've said over and over again, and I'll continue to say, that Assad must go, and it's important that our negotiators in Vienna insist that these talks are a vehicle to effectuate the removal of Assad, not continue his brutal rule. Mr. President, I yield the floor.